Welcome to this week's episode of the Full Scope Cybercast, Safeguarding the Digital Frontier. I'm your host, Matt Van Pelt, and with me today is Full Scope IT's CTO, Dan Wolk, and Brian Amadeo for Business Development. This week, we have a special guest from one of Full Scope IT's partners, Andy Runyan from FifthWall. Andy's going to help us break down this week's buzzword, cyber insurance. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on. Good to see everybody.
All right. Well, great. Let's get this episode started. And can you explain what cyber insurance is for us, Andy?
Breaking down the buzzword.
Sure, absolutely. Cyber insurance, actually, contrary to popular belief, cyber insurance has been around for about 2 decades, right? Kind of started around the whole Y2K scare. But mostly, for the most part, cyber insurance prior to the pandemic had been relegated for larger companies, right? Fortune 1000, high revenue, and not many people knew exactly what it was. So before fully jump into exactly what it is, what is why the need? Why has it come around? Well, when the pandemic hit and we had to shift to remote work, what ended up happening is cyber criminals started targeting small to medium sized businesses, right? There were so many vulnerabilities and so little education, and people were clicking on stuff and logging on to, Wi-Fi. All of this really, really bad cybersecurity practice. So what's happened is that the small businesses had to go out and educate itself on cyber insurance. So what does cyber insurance do? Probably the biggest misconception is it goes either way, is either that cyber insurance only pays for ransomware. We hear that a lot. It's like that's all that it does, or that it doesn't pay for ransomware. We hear that one as well. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. Ransomware has been kind of the hot topic, but really what cyber insurance should do is it should cover a business for first party losses, things like ransomware, things like reputational harm, loss of business income from a breach. Third party losses, think the other person, notification costs, right? Legal defense, things like that. And then also cybercrime, think theft of funds, right? Bad actor comes in, flips a fake invoice to somebody in accounting, and they pay $75,000 to poof, right? Money goes away. At the base level, those 3 levels of coverage are what cyber insurance should do if it's written.
I understand there's cyber insurance, but I've also heard the term a warranty.
Correct. Yeah.
I don't understand the difference.
What's the difference, right? Yeah, sure. So a warranty, think about insurance on a car and a warranty on a car, right? We fully believe at FifthWall that they work together, right? You really don't want to have one necessarily without the other. We obviously believe that the insurance should come first and that the warranty serves on top of that. But the insurance is just more comprehensive. There are certain things that insurance will cover if it is written in a comprehensive manner. And I do want to caveat it with that. There is really, really bad insurance out there for cyber, just like there's really bad car insurance, right? Like if you were to go out and buy, liability only car insurance at 25, you ain't gonna be covered for much. And the same thing with cyber insurance. But comprehensive, high limit cyber insurance is going to cover things that a warranty might not. Where a warranty is really good is if you need cash quick, right? Sometimes the cyber insurance claims process can drag out because we're looking at things like reputational harm, notification costs, setting up a call center, forensics. That thing can kind of stretch out. If you go out and on top of your insurance, you purchase you $100,000 or $250,000 or $500,000 warranty, and you can make that claim and get that cash quick, it can help have some cash on hand immediately. But really, honestly, I think one of the biggest frustrations in the channel for us right now is that narrative that warranties are cheaper, because they're not. The average policy written at FifthWall for a small business is around $400 a month, right? And then the other thing is that, if you have to pick one, you should pick the warranty. For me, if the cost is even, forget the higher, lower, whatever, right? I'm going to pick the thing that's going to cover me most fully, right? And I know I'm an insurance nerd, and I know I've been in insurance in different levels, but if I've got to pick one, I'm going to pick the thing that has the most comprehensive coverage, because as a small business owner, I know that I don't know where all the tentacles of a breach can go to, right? Like I can kind of admit that ignorance. So I'm going to need something at the base level that will cover the most types of losses possible. And that's
And that's
cyber insurance.
probably, you'd figure that out based on the type of business, what their needs are, and
Correct.
that to where it would make sense. And then is a certificate a whole nother thing? Like I've heard that too. Like, oh, we've got a cyber certificate on our general liability, and my understanding is that's like next to nothing.
Yeah. So that's also known as an endorsement or an add-on, right? And those are honestly, if I had to throw a knife at one type of coverage today, right? Like if we're just calling a spade, and I had to pick on one, that's the one I'm picking on. And the reason is because it gives a business the warm and fuzzies. Here is what happens nationwide, right? Insurance has always been placed with our local, generalist insurance agent that does business insurance as a whole. And it's my buddy from college, and we, have beers and play golf on a Saturday, right? And I love him, and he's a great dude. He does our work comp, and he does our building insurance. You might have our employee benefits, and then now here comes this cyber thing, and I've got my business owner's policy through the Hartford or Liberty Mutual or Travelers or whoever it may be, right? And I need cyber, so I go to my local agent who doesn't fully understand cyber because they don't have a specialty or a person who's dedicated to that. Well, they just throw that add-on, right? The problem with that is those add-ons a lot of times are lower limits. They may be 100K, 250K, and that business may have a $4 million risk depending on revenue and what sector they're in. So it's a loss quantification issue, right? Did I buy enough insurance to match my average loss? The other part of it is they have a lot of sublimits. And what I mean by sublimits is like you'll see that a policy has X amount of coverage, like it has $1 million of coverage, right? But you read down into the fine print and it's like, yeah, but you only got 500, or excuse me, 50K of ransom payment, right? Well, right now the average ransom payment's over 500,000, or you've only got $250,000 of business income, right? We consulted on a car dealership not long ago that had 250K of business income. We estimated based on revenue that would last them about 8 hours. So that's where the issues come with those add-ons. And the reason that I dislike them the most is because they give the customer the warm and fuzzy. I went to my guy. I love my guy. I play golf with my guy on the weekend. He'd never steer me wrong. I told him I needed cyber, and he sold me this thing that says cyber, but it ain't cyber,
And
right? Like
probably not on
it's
purpose. He's just not. He
no.
doesn't
I
realize there's
That's right.
limitations.
That's right. And I mean, it's there is no, I always talk to people. It's like going to your general practitioner. You know what I'm saying? Like if I go to my general practitioner and I have like a very, very high A1C and advanced diabetes, he's going to be able to treat it to a degree. But at some point, I'm going to need to go see an endocrinologist, right? Once you get to a certain revenue, you need to go see a cyber specialist. There's a level of consultation there around loss quantification. We were working with a nonprofit last week. Nonprofit exposure completely different than somebody that generates normal revenue. When you're dealing with donors and things like that, we need to be able to have those conversations and understand how they tie into certain types of coverage.
How do you avoid getting into a finger pointing match with cloud providers?
Yeah, so that's a that's a really interesting question. And what I'll say is that when a breach does occur, right? And listen, claims are out there, right? And they're happening more than they used to. I will tell you that where things have changed has been on the underwriting side from our end, in that the insurance questions are not asking perfect questions. And sometimes those questions, I know you guys are probably helped with applications. Sometimes those questions are frustrating. Sometimes they don't have anything to do with the actual risk. Sometimes they're way too in detail, but the questions are getting better. We've graduated from the days of, are you a marijuana shop? Have you had a loss in the last 2 years? What's your revenue? How many employees? Here's your quote. That's where we were at in 2019. But when a claim does occur, I feel like there are fewer massive claims right now to insurance when the business has been underwritten properly, right? When the business has been underwritten properly, and we look at, is there MFA in place? Are we backing up properly? Are we, patching properly? Are we training employees? But when a claim does occur, right? what it comes down to a lot of times, because if you've read in the news lately, like there's a major lawsuit out in California where there I think it was a law firm that was breached. They got hit pretty hard, over $1 million, right? And they came back to their MSP. They're suing their MSP and their backup provider. I think Acronis was named in the suit, right? Um, it's going to come down a lot to those controls and what they said on the application, right? If they are doing what they are supposed to do, right, and everybody it was truthful, right, on the front end, it's kind of hard to point fingers there, right? Insurance is going to pay, right? In that scenario, I believe if I've read correctly on this, they tried to come at Acronis on the backups, and they were like, guys, it wasn't the backups, it was y'all. You didn't have MFA in place, and you got fished. The backups did what they were supposed to, but you gave them access to the backups, right? So those are the conversations that are being had. I know there's a lot of horror stories in the channel, about claims being denied or, folks being sued and things like that. And does it occur? Yes, it occurs, right? We can't deny it. Does it occur at a massive clip? Are we seeing it regularly, even monthly? We're not, So I think kind of that was a long answer to a short question. Transparency, honesty on the front side of the app, right? And then making a claim right out of the gate, notifying everybody and establishing clear lines of sight for everybody. Hey, MSP, we've had a claim. Let's report it to insurance. Let's call insurance, see what you guys are doing. What you're allowed to do, things like that. I think that prevents as much finger pointing as possible.
How often are the questionnaires being updated, and do they need to be renewed with the policy renewals?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. One of the interesting thing about the questionnaires and what I love about insurance, right, is you see in the MSP space for a while there, it was just education, right? Like, hey, you need MFA because this is what MFA does. You need to train your people because here's a stat about phishing loss, right? Well, you're educating people that don't understand things at the level that you understand, right? So for a couple years there, we saw people run towards compliance. Hey, you need MFA because it aligns you with HIPAA, or you need security awareness training because it aligns you with the new FTC safeguard rules, right? Well, the problem with that is sometimes people don't care about compliance. I mean, I was on with the MSP the other day. He was like, "Man, we talk about that. They don't give a rip,
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, to your point, when is the last time HIPAA updated? 2020, 4 years ago, pre-pandemic, right? When does cyber insurance update? Yesterday. The cyber insurance underwriting literally evolves weekly, monthly. So the apps do change. I would say that the average carrier changes their app at least yearly. We evaluate ours quarterly. And the way that FifthWall has positioned itself differently in the market is in the old days, if you wanted a CFC quote, you had to fill out the CFC app. If you wanted a Tokyo Marine quote, you had to fill out a Tokyo Marine app. And all of those things came in PDF form, right? And they were like 14, 15 pages. And it was just gobbledygook of questions, right? Like everything was just kind of word salad out there. Nobody knew which question was important. There were no tiers or anything. TIE, not, I mean, there were some tiers, right? Like people were yeah, there were a lot of tiers there for 2 or 3 years. But what we've done is we've come up with a single digital app, right? And we do tell you, here are the most important questions, right? MFA right out of the gate, number one, right? From MFA, we're going to look at backups. That needs to happen. If it can happen daily, great. It needs to happen at least weekly. Patching strategy needs to be inside of a month. EDR or antivirus. If you get to some levels of revenue in certain sectors, it might be an MDR question, right? Like we may want to see 24/7, but it depends on the sector and the revenue. And then lastly, security awareness training. Like, is that happening with phishing simulation? And is it happening throughout the organization? Is your C-suite doing it too, right? So as those things update, right, the questions become more refined. We review ours quarterly to talk with our carriers to see if anything's changing. our last application update, because ours is kind of like a Frankenstein's monster. You fill out that one general digital app, and it goes out to 45 carriers. Our last app update was in Q1 of 2020.
We've been seeing a lot of push from some of the bigger providers to move from MFA to passkeys. Have you seen anything change in the questionnaires about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always, again, back to my comment about insurance is always adapting. I mean, if you think about it from from an actuarial standpoint, we're always going to try to figure out ways to prevent claims or have fewer claims or less money go out the door, right? So I have seen an evolution from do you have MFA, yes or no, right? To where is MFA, right? Like, don't just tell us if you have it, yes or no. Like, let us know where within the organization it's placed, right? To now, we are starting to see some questions around what type of MFA, right? Or we would prefer a passkey, or where I think we're going, honestly. If you look at the CISA recommendation for MFA, right? Like, and I'm not saying that CISA is the gold standard, but CISA generally follows NIST, and NIST is kind of generally considered one of the gold standards, right? The CISA recommendation is passwordless phishing resistant MFA, right? So I could see an era where we move away from, if I work at a $200 million revenue hospital, me just getting a green button on my phone and saying yes, insurance going, hey, look, we're not okay with that. And if you do that, your premium's going to be higher and your deductible is going to be more. We need you to face scan QR code, no password MFA for us to be comfortable with the risk. I definitely could see us move that direction. But yes, it is evolving. It's changing. The one thing that I do, right now, I think it's a good time to kind of plant a flag in the ground on this and make sure everybody out there that listens and understands this is that each carrier has the autonomy to do whatever the world they want to do, right? Like, there is no standardization of language. I hate it. I wish that ransomware was called ransomware and not cyber extortion on another form, right? So there's no standardization of language. There's no standardization of policy form or anything like that. And until that happens, the carriers do have the autonomy to underwrite, judge risk, accept risk, however the world they want to, right? So you may see one carrier say passkeys, and you may have another one that's completely okay with Microsoft Authenticator at the basic level, right? Like, I mean, they literally have the autonomy to do whatever they want to.
Are you seeing any trending towards everybody getting on the same page?
I see a lot of clamoring in the channel for it. I don't know that I see any action. I made the comment the other day. I was talking to one of our partners, and I said, you know how it is, man. Anything in the channel is gonna move at a turtle pace, and that's I see carriers pushing back, but I see wholesale brokers, retail agents, MSPs, clients, everybody else is going, please, can we get some standardization of language and form and things like that? But I don't right now. I don't see any move towards that. What I have seen move towards is requirements of cyber insurance. When I started in the late 2010s, nobody was requiring it, right? And what we're starting to see now is, particularly with governments, right? Like, if you're a third party doing business with a government entity, we're starting to see those guys say, hey, we're not going to give you the contract if you don't have X amount of insurance, right? We're starting to see MSPs required in their MSA, the folks that they work with. We're starting to see certain third parties, that target breach really freaked everybody out, right? The target breach was in the multiples of millions, and it was started by an HVAC contractor. And it was like, that was the light bulb moment for a lot of people to go, oh crap, we need to start checking everybody's homework that touches the network, right? So we are starting to see that. I think there is going to be a move going forward. Y'all, it is still wild to me that a bank will float a new business loan. And we know the stats that we know about small businesses closing after a ransomware event. And a bank they'll require a certificate of general liability. You got to have building insurance. But like, there's not a bank in America.
Cyber.
No, there's not a bank in America requiring cyber liability. And yet here we sit And CISA is passing out stats saying over half of small businesses that pay a ransom are closed within 6 months. And no bank in America is looking at that going, you know what? That's making people default on their loans. I might want to require that we have cyber insurance, and we might
Seems
want to vet that
bizarre.
up front. It's, I mean, sitting in my side of the fence, it's the craziest thing to me.
Yeah. They'll catch on.
It's coming. I mean, like I said, everybody, I'd take it back. Nobody wants it to make it harder to do business, right? But there's a difference between making it harder to do business just because we're chasing ghosts and making it harder to do business because it's the right thing for the business owner. And I honestly believe that this is the right thing for the business owner.
Yeah, I'm just surprised, considering the bank is always assessing the risk of the loan to begin with, that's not a decent part of their evaluation. But then again, we talk this all the time. It's important to us.
Right. It is important, but listen, it's newer. This is a newer type of risk, right? I mean, the bank, insurance, the bank, everybody has hundreds of years of fire risk data, right?
True.
And work slip and fall data, right? Things like that. I mean, we're generations of educated on those types of losses. Cyber loss education is still pretty new, especially for small to medium sized business.
It was about 2015, I think, was the first time that I was exposed to it. And my thought was, who's buying this?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I was like, what is the real risk here? Like, man, good luck selling those.
Yeah.
Less than 10 years later, and it's like half of the conversations I'm having.
Here we are. I mean, and this is, I don't imagine my former boss will listen to this, but if he does, hey, PG, I love you. But like I started in 2019 and they trained me up on cyber insurance. I was a generalist, right? I sold everything. And after about 2 years of learning it, writing some policies, going to some conferences, partnering with some MSPs, I walked into my boss in 2021 and I was like, man, this is what I want to do. Like, this is, I get it. I feel like, even though, I mean, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man's king, right? Like, I'm not saying that I'm some genius, but I realized that I knew more about it than the average bear in my area. I was like, this is what I want to do. And he goes, you're going to starve to death. There's no way. He was like, you're going, we can't, in Northeast Arkansas, we can't get you in front of enough people to where you're going to be able to feed your family. And I mean, I'm not saying he was wrong, because regionally, I think he was correct. But I was passionate enough about it, and I believed in that sentiment enough that I found my way to a nationwide wholesaler that specializes in cyber.
And with that, since I know you didn't necessarily, we didn't ask you to do a proper introduction, but with that, FifthWall only does this. So there is no confusion. There is no other, like, this is why you are the specialist that you are in this area, right? So there's no other insurance that FifthWall manages, just cyber. So this is your world.
That's right. So 100%. And we do take E&O insurance for managed service providers and MSSPs, which is a little bit different because there's professional liability in there with the cyber and the media liability. So we do take E&O and cyber insurance, but nothing else. And the reason, there's really a twofold reason that we do that. If one of our partners brings us a client, first and foremost, we want them to know that we are specialists on this matter, and we are not generalists just trying to sell them a policy, right? We understand their risk. We're going to be able to consult them on their risk and educate them and price them in a way that more than likely their local agent cannot. That's first and foremost, right? And then secondarily, there's a very unspoken language around insurance, and it is very relational. I mentioned it earlier, like my local guy's my buddy, and we play golf on the weekends, and they don't want another agent coming in kind of with this smash and grab thing. Like, even if they need help on one line, right? I mean, guys, I've seen it for half a decade now. It's like, okay, just help me on this, but don't talk to me about anything else, because I don't want to disrupt this relationship with this guy I go to church with, or this guy that my kids go to school with, right? So it does help us create very clear swim lanes and kind of put a fence up around cyber. If somebody has that posture where they're like, man, I love my local agent, but they don't know their rear end from first base about cyber insurance, we can go in and help just write the cyber and say, keep your agent, keep your work comp, keep your business auto with them, maintain your relationship. We'll just peel this one off, and we'll help with the cyber from a specialist standpoint.
So we've been talking about companies needing cyber insurance. What about individuals? Do they need cyber insurance?
It's a great question, and I mean it's something that comes up quite often, right? First of all, like from a fifth wall standpoint, right? There's a hard separation there. We don't write any personal lines of insurance or anything like that. Like what we do is specifically related to MSPs, MSSPs, tech brokers, compliance folks, and their clients. So the business side of it. There are cyber protections that you can put in it, guys. The crazy thing is it's usually on your homeowner's policy. I would call your local agent, right, and ask them if you have a concern about that. Um, Not to go into the gory details, but we've had a scenario that hit very close to home where we've had folks that we know fall victim to romance scams, so where they're wiring money, to probably a hairy leg Russian in his basement that they think is some
Ew.
good looking 25-year-old girl that has an interest in them. Not going to name any names there, but that one's been closer to home than I'd like recently. And there are some protections that you can put in there. Talk to your local agent, ask them. I can't speak on that. I'm not licensed to sell that stuff, right? We don't sell that stuff. And then the other thing that I'm going to do here, and this is kind of a writer downer for everybody, included, you guys included, is IC3.gov, right? The FBI Cybercrimes Unit, right? If you know a business or a person, okay, that has experienced a loss of funds due to a cybercrime, whether it is invoice manipulation at the business level, credit cards, and not credit card scams, like gift card scams, or at the personal level, somebody that has, like if you come home and dad through Facebook wired $2,000 for somebody to catch a flight, to come see him and meet up with him, and they hadn't shown up yet, right? Notify the FBI, IC3.gov. If that notification and the details around that are reported within 48 to 72 hours, we've got a fighting chance, right? If it's weeks, that money's gone.
That's interesting. I hadn't even thought about that, but I know I'm not going to jump ahead, but the story of the week is the first time that something like that made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of I went, yeah.
There's a lot. And one of the things I love about our industry is those light bulb moments occur for me just about every week, right? Like you hear some news story
happens.
or some new threat vector, or somebody comes up with a new type of scam or something like that, and you go, wow, I hadn't thought about it hitting like that. But to me, what that does is, right, and I know that I sound like I'm banging the same drum. It goes back to the need for the comprehensive insurance, right? Like if we know that this thing could go a million different ways, right? Why would I go by cut rate insurance with exclusions and sublimits and caveats and things like that? I want the most comprehensive thing that's going to cover me for a loss that I can't even think of today on April the 8th.
So, pre-existing conditions, does that count for cyber insurance like it does for any other type of insurance?
100%. So when we talk about pre-existing conditions, we think about like health insurance or life insurance, right? And let's talk about that, right? So if I, as Andy, apply for health insurance or life insurance, and I go in and I say I'm a 42-year-old male, I weigh 185 pounds, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I work out 3 times a week, right? And I'm good, right? I'm going to get a pretty good rate, right? So you get a low deductible, might get a longer term policy, whatever, right? Depending on what type of insurance we're looking at. If I go in and I say I'm a 42-year-old male, I'm 5'10", 285. I smoke a pack a day. I drink 6 beers every time I come home after work, and I do a little methamphetamine on the side recreationally, right? Like that rate is going to reflect just socially, right? Hey, it is Arkansas, right? Like it is Northeast Arkansas. It's a little close to home. But anyway, like that rate would affect, right? I would probably be denied insurance, right? Like there wouldn't be people that would want to take that. But if I did, I'm going to pay through the roof, right? Like my rate's going to go high, super high. Same thing with cyber insurance. And it runs back to, I mentioned our application earlier, having like some key controls. Back in 2019, when I started this journey, right, there were no 15 pieces of cyber insurance flair. Like if you get the old Office Space reference when Jennifer Aniston worked at Tchotchke's, right? Like she had to have her 15 pieces of flair to go to work. There were no 15 pieces of flair in 2019. 2024, multi-factor authentication, right? Training your employees, patching, backups, some type of antiviruses being outpaced by EDR. Really, we're to the point to where if you're a revenue at all, it's going to be EDR, MDR, and if those things are missing, you might as well consider that a pre-existing condition. Now, you got one pre-existing condition. We're going to have a conversation about it. You may or may not have to address it, but you're going to pay for it. You got two pre-existing conditions. That rate's going to be really uncomfortable. You got three or more, you ain't getting insurance, right? Like that's where we're at right now. So yeah, phenomenal question there. And businesses are starting to learn that like as those renewals come up or as they go to market, those quote unquote pre-existing conditions or controls that aren't in place are nailing them at times. And I will tell you this: here's another thing. If you're out there in the cyber or in the business world, we talked about the needle moving towards where third parties are going to require that you have insurance, or the government or your bank or whoever, right? Every year that you don't adopt cyber insurance, you look worse to the market. And I know that sounds crazy salesy from an insurance guy, right? But like one of the questions is, do they have a current policy in place? And guys, if you're past $1 million in revenue and it's 2024 and you don't have cyber insurance in place, the underwriters are sitting there going, these guys have their head in the sand. Like, are they not paying attention to what's going on out there? Are they risk adverse? Are they trying to get by on the cheap? Right? Like all of those things factor in when their risk is being evaluated. And there will be some carriers that'll back off and go, hey, we're not going to write any at a certain revenue. We're not going to write any virgin risk in 2024.
What about victims to previous attacks? If they've leveled up their game and they've got all the MFA controls in place,
perfect.
Does that count against them?
Yes. No. Phenomenal question. Right. So really, there's two issues there, right? And I would say that there's three. So like virgin coverage don't have coverage at all, right? And then we've had an incident and we did something, right? Or multiple things. And then we had an incident and we didn't do a thing, right? We just filed insurance and paid our deductible and rock and roll, right? The worst is the last, right? The worst is the last. You will either get discontinued or you'll have a major rate hike. So, there is some grace out there, right? What I would say is going to happen, and Danny, I think this is a great question, a great talking point, guys. I apologize about the train. I'm right there by the train tracks, but let's say we've got access to 45 markets, right? You don't have insurance in 2024, or you've had a claim in your history, that 45 probably goes down to about 12 to 15, right? You've had a claim, but you have gone in from that claim and gone, hey guys, look, we realize that we got caught with our britches down. We've got MFA now. We've got EDR. We're training our people. We're phishing simulating every week. We have an IR, or not every week, every month. We have an IR plan. We've done all this stuff, right? You're still going to pay the piper. You're probably going to have a higher deductible. You're not going to get that $5,000 deductible that some of your peers have. You may have a $25K deductible or a $50K deductible, right? We've seen deductibles as high as $100,000 or $250K for larger revenue, right? They're going to get their money back, and they're going to make sure that you batten the hatches a little bit. But it's not going to be as bad if you had a breach and just sat there twiddling your thumbs.
I think one of the most common things I've seen, at least in some of our conversations, is being underinsured, right? Where they don't kind of tie it to revenue and understanding. But that is kind of the most common thing that I see from like when you guys are doing some of the evaluations. Is that pretty typical, not just us?
100%. And that's so here's the progression, right? Cyber insurance adoption prior to the pandemic in the small to medium sized business space was like less than 10%. Like people just didn't have it, right? So we spent the last 4 to 5 years educating people on why you need cyber insurance, right? So they went out and they bought something at about a 50 to 60% clip. The studies and polls roughly somewhere between 50 and 60% of small size businesses have cyber insurance in 2024. So there's been a massive uptick, right? Now, for those that have it, where we're at, and Brian, you are spot on this. Where we're at is like, do you have what you need? Does your coverage match your average risk? And how we are able to have that conversation is in 2024. Now we've got claims data, almost 5 years of claims data, right, from the small to medium sized business space. And we're able to go in through some calculators, some loss calculators, and say, okay, here's your revenue, here's the number of employees you have, here's the records that you have on file, and here's the sector that you're in, right? So, $100 million orthopedic with around 500,000 records and 200 employees. You know, you guys on average, and when we say on average, just to let you know where average comes from, it's CISA data, right? I've spoken with CISA multiple times. I've got good friends in the CISA office in Little Rock where I live. They will tell you the average downtime for a small to medium sized business is somewhere between 15 and 20 days, right? So what we do is we'll come in, we'll run them through that calculator and say, hey, at 5 days down, 15 days down, 30 days down, 40, 60, like we'll educate on the whole thing, right? And say on average, because I can't sit there and tell you should buy X insurance. I can't tell you should buy 1 million or you should buy 2 million or you should buy 5 million. But what I can tell you is based on your size and your sector, based on what we know, and 15 average days down, here's about what the average loss would look like for somebody who looks like you. Now, you go do with that, like your risk tolerance is your risk tolerance. Go do that with what you wish, But we are very much in a moment where 1 million used to be the gold standard. Guys, to close 2023, the average small to medium sized business cyber claim was between 1.4 and 1.5 million dollars. What does that tell you about $1 million being the gold standard, right? We use the statement now that 2 is the new 1, right? And loss quantification and loss education is a big part of that. But yes, massively underinsured. So many folks have no idea what their risk is. And if you're in a sector where you've experienced exponential growth, I mean, we've got some pockets. Don't want to get into a discussion about the economy, right? But we've got some pockets that have really, kind of hockey sticked over the last couple of years. If you were sitting at 1 million in revenue 5 years ago, and you're at 25 million in revenue now,
that's a different policy.
You need some different cyber insurance, 100%.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, Andy, one final question for those interested in cyber insurance. What's the best way to reach out?
So a couple of ways. First of all, pretty active on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, shoot me a connect or a follow. You can message me there. My email is Andy.Runyan, Runyan, at FifthWallSolutions.com. You can go by that FifthWallSolutions.com webpage and poke around a little bit until you find something. That's another way. And then I don't mind telling you, I'm a Southerner, I'm a talker, I'm a texter. If you hadn't figured it out, you can call me on my cell phone at 870-219-1339. And listen, if you're a scammer out there and you want to take advantage of me, you're going to end up on my LinkedIn page. I'm going to make fun of you and I'm going to make you look bad and I'm going to screenshot it. I'm going to post it to LinkedIn. So, hit me up on my cell phone, email me, shoot me a shot on LinkedIn. If you have questions, we'll get you to somebody that can help.
He's a good follow. You do post some fun stuff.
We have a little fun. Yeah. My team does a pretty good job of balancing the professional and the comedy. We try to enjoy what we do.
All right. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, check out our blog post called What is Cyber Insurance? There will be a link in this week's episode description, and we will also have a link posted on our website, fullscopeit.com/resources.
This is the story of the week.
Listen up!
Okay, brings us to the story of the week, brought to us from IT Brew. HSB adds cyber protection to automotive coverage. New auto insurance policies cover not just fender benders, but a new class of car trouble. James Hajar, the Chief Product and Risk Officer from HSB's Treaty Division, told IT Brew, just like computer attacks against a personal desktop, laptop, or personal computing device, we see the car as another area of exposure relative to hackers looking to do damage or otherwise alter data within the car. What do we think?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning kind of earlier, I had just bought a 2015 vehicle from the same parent company as that Jeep that got hacked. So it's basically the exact same electronics, and my brain went, "Oh, that's a thing." And so I actually come from a little bit of an insurance company. But my thought was, well, if something like that happens, is that considered still just part of, like, let's just say they took control of the vehicle and made it, whatever accident involved other people and things like that. Is it still just part of the same comp and collision that you're paying for? Is it said, oh, well, we didn't expect that. We didn't insure you for that. Well, who expected that? Nobody expected that. It's still an accident, but there's so many variables and so many questions that come from where that line in the sand is as far as that part of the insurance. So now seeing that now I'm curious to reach out to my own auto insurance and go, am I covered for that? Is that part of what I'm paying for or not? But and it's only obviously as more and more cars are heavily computerized, I guess is the best way to say it. This is a constant thing. Or even going back to the phone, we're all plugging our phones into the car. So even if they're just breaching the phone that's attached to the car, it's still a point of exposure, I would imagine. Dan, maybe you have some expertise there.
Yeah. I've had cars get stuck in the shop for an extra 2 or 3 days because they couldn't reset a steering wheel ECU that wasn't hacked. It just needed to be replaced. So I can only imagine if somebody did get into the CAN bus system and start destroying ECUs across the whole system, how long it would take to repair that. And they might total a car for enough ECU damage. And if the insurance doesn't cover that, you may be left with a really nice looking car that's just a brick.
Yeah,
it's concerning.
Yep.
So,
And that's, I mean, if you think about, I mean, and we've seen this already, we've seen it in the news, right? But if you swing that, I mean, like that is a very real thing that the individual needs to consider moving forward. Now, swing that back over to the business side and think about how that relates to the transportation industry, right? The transportation industry as a whole, 10 years ago, paper maps, CB radio,
right.
I mean, there was no tech, right? It was like Jim Bob's going to go jump in his truck and he's heading off to California for 2 weeks and he ain't talking to anybody and there ain't a stitch of internet on that thing, right? Well, now where are we at in 2024? I've got a contact in Texas that they they deal with a lot of transportation accounts. Not only are we seeing transportation kind of evolve, and in order to keep up with the Joneses, you have to become more tech savvy, right? Like we're headed in that direction. Right, GPS, right? Digital communication, iPads in the truck, things like that that are very internet dependent, right? But guess what? Transportation as an industry, remember how earlier I said small to medium sized businesses have adopted cyber insurance? I would guess, and I don't know, but I would think from the conversations that I have that transportation is still in the dark ages. I would think less than a quarter have what they need. And then when you start going in and looking at that loss quantification that Brian was talking about, it's got to be 1 in 10, right, or less. So, I mean, in general, when we think about transportation, whether it's corporate transportation or personal transportation, that's something that 10 years ago was not internet dependent, right? And as we become more internet dependent as individuals or in transport or corporate trucking, right? We have to recognize that risk. We have to put in the safeguards to guard it. And we have to insure ourselves against potential loss to make sure that there aren't major, both individual and corporate windfalls when a breach does happen.
and even GPS jamming was kind of this pie in the sky idea a few years ago, but now we're seeing in the news that all through the Middle East that there's GPS jamming going on all over the place, and it's having a trickle down effect on delivery companies and taxis and food delivery, and even just people going to visit their friends and don't know how to get there. Um, and the cost of that can really add up, especially if there was a GPS jamming attack in a large metropolitan area.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. My son and I, my 14-year-old had a baseball tournament about an hour and 40 minutes from the house this weekend, and we got it plugged up, ready to go and everything. And I turned on GPS and I told him, I was kind of one of those dad moments. I was like, hey, just want you to know I know how to get there. It's just in case, right? Like this is just a backup, But I mean, right? Yeah, but we had this really funny dad-son conversation where it was like, hey, Dad, when did you start driving? 1997, right? How'd you guys know where to go back then? And it was this really funny conversation between a child that's been raised in the digital age where he's about to start driving, right? He passed his driving test, and his entire driving experience is I can plug this thing right here into my car and it'll tell me exactly where to go. I don't have to remember anything. I'm never going to have to read a physical map, any of that stuff. And one of the kind of one of those crazy moments you have as a dad where you worry about the safety of your child is like, this child is going to be raised to drive completely dependent on technology.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was thinking about service vehicles. As soon as you said food delivery, Dan, I went, the general public will never live to let that down. If something like that, don't stop me from getting food. But if you think about, like, say, plumbing, HVAC, any kind of critical infrastructure service related company, that suddenly an entire fleet could be shut down. That's a big deal. Like, that's a way bigger scenario than I think any of us were thinking about.
Well, look at what happened at the city of Dallas last year, right? I mean, we had 911 calls and fire rescue on pen and paper for about 2 weeks. I say I'm just saying that scenario, right? And when you look at it from a municipality standpoint and the vehicles and the transportation and that type of communication that goes along with that, and like the speed with which that has to happen to save lives, right? Going backwards and not having an incident response plan. I mean, now you're talking about the loss of life, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it gets really creepy when you start looking at that type of stuff. And it's why, honestly, and I like I said, I'm not trying to go apocalyptic, but I mean, I've sat in the room with these guys from CISA and the FBI, and these are some of my good friends. What we're seeing on a worldwide stage is cyber is leading the physical when it comes to world conflict now. When you look at Russia, Ukraine, what did Russia do to Ukraine first before, the tanks and the planes rolled in? Kyiv went completely dark. There was no Twitter. There was no, all of that stuff, right? They shut everything down first, and then the tanks and the bombs and the missiles and the planes came next. And listening to those guys talk, it is a scary but fascinating look at modern warfare and bad actors and things like that. So, I mean, I know we've kind of gone off the rails from personal autos here to World War, but when you start thinking about how cyber affects transportation, that's a rabbit hole. You can get down there quick.
Yeah, my father-in-law borrowed our really good atlas about 15 years ago and never returned it, and I'm pretty sure he's lost it. But I've been thinking recently that I really ought to replace that thing. It was.
It's really funny that it's funny that you said we were in a gas station.
They're going to be more and more valuable.
Yeah, we were in a gas station the other day, and there were like physical maps in there, right? Like, like there was an actual map, and I was like, I haven't seen one of these in forever. And then I kind of walked to go get my drink, and I went, do I need to go get one of those? Like, is that? I mean, like, that's where the crazy, cyber brain goes off, and it's like, might not be a bad idea to have one in the back of the car,
Yeah. I do use GPS, but I always try to just still take myself there. And then it helps me out, say, if there's an accident 30 miles ahead that I couldn't be possibly aware of. But yeah, I still try to drive myself.
Let's all call a spade a spade. The best thing about GPS is the speed trap warnings, right? Like that's really what we use GPS
100%. 100%. Yep, I remember the original Waze where you could add that there was an officer there, and then the cops were doing the opposite, where they were joining and then saying, "No, not there. No, not there." So it was this battle of how many drivers versus police officers, and I think their algorithm went, "Yeah, you're still there."
That's funny. That's great.
Well, that's a wrap for this special edition of the Full Scope Cybercast, Safeguarding the Digital Frontier. Just want to say thank you to our guest, Andy Runyan from FifthWall, and as always, thanks to you for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode, so until then, stay behind your firewall.